The Protectionist. From the time of his first speech in Congress until the end of his life, McKinley sought to elaborate, clarify, and systematize the true American policy of protection. He laid down the principle as its basis, that self-preservation is the first law of nature, as it is and should be of nations. He insisted upon the paramount importance of the general welfare, and that the country must be made independent in a broad and comprehensive sense, strong, self-supporting, and self-sustaining. This was the teaching of Hamilton and Washington. He further laid down the cardinal principle of the Protectionist school in the words, "It is our duty, and we ought to protect, as sacredly and assuredly, the labor and industry of the United States, as we would protect her honor from taint or her territory from invasion." So long as conditions are widely varied in different parts of the world, he maintained, it is clear that some compensation from the inequalities must be devised. If the cheapness of foreign labor gives an undue advantage to the foreigner against our own manufactures, to the hindrance of our own development, the law of self-preservation calls for protection against the inequality. Free trade throughout the world might be ideal if conditions were equal, and we had any guarantee that they would remain so. But all the nations of the world except Great Britain and two of her dependencies, New South Wales and New Zealand, believe in the tariff as a means of protecting their own interests. Great Britain also believed in it during the early years of her history, until, having built up vast industries, a great accumulation of capital, and a well-established trade, she dared defy competition and undertook to supply the markets of the world. Many Englishmen doubt the wisdom of this policy. Certainly, her working men have gained no benefit from it. The United States is in no position to make so hazardous an experiment. There is a vast difference between free trade as it exists among the states of our own country and free trade among nations. McKinley referred to this more than once. Here we are one country, one language, one allegiance, one standard of citizenship, one flag, one constitution, one nation, one destiny. It is otherwise with foreign nations, each a separate organism, a distinct and independent political society organized for its own, to protect its own, to work out its own destiny. He denied the right of foreign nations to claim the privilege of trading on equal terms with our own producers, on the ground that the foreigner pays no taxes, contributes nothing to the general welfare of the country, and is not amenable to its laws. It is a correct principle of government, he argued, to discriminate against a foreign producer as a means of protecting, defending, and preserving the rights of our own citizens. He pointed out that a vast sum is needed annually to pay the necessary expenses of the government, and that American sentiment was practically unanimous in favor of raising at least a large share of the necessary revenues by levying duties on foreign importations. On what system shall such duties be determined? Here is the parting of the ways. Those who favor a tariff for revenue only would raise the needed funds for the support of the government without a wise discrimination in favor of American manufacturers. They would tax articles not produced or not capable of being produced in the United States, such as tea, coffee, spices, drugs, etc., aiming to raise the largest possible revenue from the smallest possible number of articles. They would admit free of duty all articles manufactured abroad, the like of which are or can be made in America, thus admitting the foreigner to equal privileges with our own citizens. This plan leaves American industries to compete as best they can with foreign importations, in spite of increased cost of production, whether due to higher cost of labor or other causes, and, ignoring the value of that general prosperity which comes from busy mills, seeks an advantage in cheapness of products which the system is expected to secure. Those who favor a tariff for both revenue and protection would proceed on exactly the opposite principle. Articles which we could not produce would come in free. The duty would be placed on articles which we can produce. This would serve a double purpose. First, it would raise the needed revenue, just as the other system would, and second, it would add a sufficient price to the imported and competing article to offset the extra cost of making the article in this country. This is what McKinley meant by a wise discrimination. To the objection that this policy would increase the price, not only of the imported article, but also of the domestic product, McKinley brought forward a vast array of well-digested statistics to show that such had not been the experience of the country. American competition, he claimed, and proved it by an array of facts that made his argument unanswerable, would under all ordinary circumstances keep the prices at a lower level, while if the foreign producer were unable to drive his American rival out of the American market, we should be obliged to pay whatever price the foreigner chose to demand. The skill with which McKinley drove home his arguments may be illustrated by an extract from the debate on the Mills Tariff Bill. His speech in opposition to the bill was delivered on the 18th of May, 1888. Referring to the price of clothing, he said, "Mr. Chairman, I represent a district comprising some 200,000 people, a large majority of the voters in the district being working men. I have represented them for a good many years, and I have never had a complaint from one of them that their clothes were too high. Have you? Has any gentleman on this floor met with such complaint in his district?" Mr. Morse, "They did not buy them of me." No, let us see. If they had bought of the gentleman from Massachusetts, it would have made no difference, and there could have been no complaint. Let us examine the matter. Mr. McKinley here produced a bundle containing a suit of clothes, which he opened and displayed amid great laughter and applause. "Come now, will the gentleman from Massachusetts know his own goods?" Renewed laughter. "We recall, Mr. Chairman, that the chairman of the Committee on Ways and Means talked about the laboring man who worked for 10 days at $1 a day, and then went with his $10 wages to buy a suit of clothes. It is the old story. It is found in the works of Adam Smith." Laughter and applause on the Republican side. "I have heard it in this House for 10 years past. It has served many a free trader. It is the old story, I repeat, of the man who gets $1 a day for his wages, and having worked for the 10 days, goes to buy his suit of clothes. He believes he can buy it for just $10. But the robber manufacturers have been to Congress, and have got 100% put upon the goods in the shape of a tariff, and the suit of clothes, he finds, cannot be bought for $10, but he is asked $20 for it, and so he has to go back to 10 days more of sweat, 10 days more of toil, 10 days more of wear and tear of muscle and brain, to earn the $10 to purchase the suit of clothes. Then the chairman gravely asks, is not 10 days entirely annihilated? Now, a gentleman who read that speech or heard it was so touched by the pathetic story that he looked into it and sent me a suit of clothes identical with that described by the gentleman from Texas. And he sent me also the bill for it. And here is the entire suit. Robber tariffs and taxes and all have been added. And the retail cost is what? Just $10. Laughter and applause on the Republican side. So the poor fellow does not have to go back to work 10 days more to get that suit of clothes. He takes the suit with him and pays for it just $10. Applause. But in order that there might be no mistake about it, knowing the honor and honesty of the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Morse, he went to his store and bought the suit. Laughter and cheers on the Republican side. I hold in my hand the bill. Renewed laughter and applause. And now, Mr. Chairman, I never knew of a gentleman engaged in this business who sold his clothes without a profit. Laughter. And there is the same $10 suit described by the gentleman from Texas that can be bought in the city of Boston, can be bought in Philadelphia, in New York, in Chicago, in Pittsburgh, anywhere throughout the country at $10 retail. The whole suit, coat, trousers, and vest. And 40% less than it could have been bought in 1860 under your low tariff and low wages of that period. Great applause. It is a pity to destroy the sad picture of the gentleman from Texas, which was to be used in the campaign, but the truth must be told. But do you know that if it were not for protection, you would pay a great deal more for these clothes? I do not intend to go into that branch of the question, but I want to give one brief illustration of how the absence of American competition immediately sends up the foreign prices. And it is an illustration that every man will remember. My friend from Missouri, Mr. Clardy, who sits in front of me, will remember it. The Missouri Glass Company was organized several years ago for the manufacture of coarse fluted glass and cathedral glass. Last November, the factory was destroyed by fire. Cathedral glass was their specialty. Within 10 days from the time that splendid property was reduced to ashes, the foreign price of cathedral glass advanced 28% to the American consumer. Applause on the Republican side. Showing that whether you destroy the American production by free trade or by fire, it is the same thing. The price goes up to the American consumer, and all you can do is to pay the price the foreigner chooses to ask. The argument that low tariffs were needed to make cheap prices he met with expressions of withering scorn. The tariff must be sufficient to help American working men earn a decent livelihood. live in a reasonable degree of comfort and not be forced into a condition of poverty. To the statement of Fernando Wood that a celebrated shipbuilder had testified that he readily obtained workmen at from 50 to 60 cents a day, McKinley replied vigorously, "We do not want 50-cent labor." In a later address, he demanded, "Is American manhood to be degraded that merchandise may be cheap? Are cheap goods at such a cost worthy of our purpose and destiny?" In answer to the charge that protection is an obstruction to foreign trade and that it threatens the destruction of American commerce, McKinley simply presented the latest figures from the Treasury Department. In his speech on the Wood Bill, he pointed out that even under the distresses of the panic years, commerce was increasing. The exports in 1878 were, in round numbers, $637 million, as against $603 million in 1877, while imports had increased from $420 million to $475 million. He also showed that in the 10 years ending in 1875, exports from the United States had increased 72%, while in Great Britain, under free trade, they had increased only 25%. In his speech of April 6, 1882, he presented similar figures. By that time, the export trade, instead of being ruined by the protective policy, which had continued in the interval, had risen to $902,377,346, an increase in the 4 years of $264,619,454, or over 41%. On August 2, 1892, in an address at Beatrice, Nebraska, 2 years after the passage of the McKinley Bill, he again brought forward a statement from the Treasury Department and summarized his argument in these words. From 1847 to 1861, under a free trade revenue tariff, the balance of trade against us was more than $431 million, and there were but 2 years of the 15 when the balance of trade was in our favor, while from 1876 to 1891, a period of 15 years, there were just 2 years when the balance of trade was against us. There were then, under protection, 13 years when the balance of trade was in our favor, and the balance aggregated $1,649,445,246. McKinley never denied the charge that he was a high protectionist. Yet he was not a man of schedules. There were no pet industries which he wished to foster, except for the general good of the country. Possessing a marvelous fund of information about all the leading industries, and having at his instant command an array of figures which would have been a hopeless tangle to most men, he consistently used his material to plead for a broad and persistent application of a principle in which he firmly believed, and never for individual or sectional interests. He was as ready to reduce rates as to increase them, but he insisted that the protective principle should be maintained in all tariff legislation. In his speech of 1882 on the bill proposing the appointment of a tariff commission, he admitted that there are excrescences in the present tariff which should be removed, and in opening his address on the tariff bill of 1883, he said that all parties agree that the present laws require revision, amendment, and simplification, but he insisted that this should be done on the principle of recognizing a fair and just protection to American interests and American labor. This, then, is the American system of protection, as consistently advocated by McKinley, namely, 1. Duties on competing importations high enough to foster American industries, whether of the farm or the shop. 2. Low duties or none at all on necessaries not competing with home products. 3. The lowering of duties whenever in excess of actual requirements, but always with careful regard to existing industries. 4. The adjustment of all duties not by indiscriminate or horizontal reductions whenever the revenues are excessive, and not by measures prepared with a view to political advantages in one section or another, but by a thorough, broad-minded, and impartial investigation of the conditions of industry throughout the country, and with the constant aim to place America and the interests of American citizens above those of foreign competitors. It meant, briefly, favoritism for Americans against the rest of the world, but no favoritism within our own boundaries except for the purpose of promoting the general prosperity of the whole country.